Hi, and welcome back to the Management Leadership Channel. Today, we're going to be talking about change management, specifically about how we can make change stick. So this presentation, we're going to start first with just looking at the overall problem. So we're going to review some data so that we can frame the challenges that we're currently facing in the workplace with implementing change. Then we're going to talk about an equation that we recommend using within the workplace to combat the change-resistant forces to have a successful implementation. And last, we're going to show a force field analysis model. And we're going to show how that can be used to identify the variables that are impacting the change implementation negatively. So we'll finish with an example with that. So let's get started. At the data, what do we see here? Well, first of all, we see that 70% of change initiatives fail. Now, this is coming from changepoint.com. This is a research study that was done in 2024, and this was done in the US and the UK. So what's the problem? Why do we have 70% of change initiatives failing? Well, 73% of change affected employees report experiencing moderate to high stress levels. So first of all, anytime we're starting to experience change within the workplace, we get heightened levels of stress. So that's the first problem. The second problem that we see is that 74% of leaders say they involve employees in creating a change strategy. The issue is that only 42% of employees actually feel included. We also look and we can see that 39% of employees are skeptical about change to begin with. So there's an inherent resistance to change within all of us that we have to manage appropriately. I thought this was an interesting fact as well that just kind of highlights how important understanding change management and managing change within the workplace is. 31% of CEOs that got fired in 2024 were related to poor change management skills. Having so many issues with employees accepting change. What makes employees most resistant to change? Well, based on the study that was done by changepoint.com, you can see that 41% of employees reported mistrust in the organization. 39% said there was a lack of awareness around the reason for change. 38% said the fear of the unknown. So this is that inherent resistance to change, the biases that we have to manage internally. 27% said that because of a job role change that was related, it created stress for them. And 23% said that they had resistance to change because exclusion from change-related decisions. So really, we can eliminate that very easily by just including employees in the change management decisions. Now, Dr. Kurt Lewin takes this particular field of study and breaks it down very simply and says there's 3 reasons why people in organizations do not change. The first one is failure to see. The second one is failure to move. And the third is failure to finish. And there's also 3 types of change that we want to keep in mind as we're thinking about failure to see, failure to move, and failure to finish. And that is anticipatory change, which is what we really want to highlight in management. Reactive change, which is necessary for all of us, but we want to try to get ahead of it and not be as reactive. And then we have crisis change when we have supplier issues that are related to quality or safety, or just workplace issues that are crisis mode workplace issues. There are 3 types of change that we take a look at. First one is anticipatory change. So this is when we anticipate change because of threats in the market or threats in the external environment. And so we anticipate and then we start to implement change. We have reactive change, which is most of the change that we do. And that is we don't change until it becomes necessary. And then we have crisis change. Again, another one of those mandatory change management exercises. If it's a crisis mode, we have to go through it and try to push the implementation through. So we want to try to focus more from a management and leadership standpoint on anticipatory change. Now let's take a look at the change management equation. Change management equation, this is what we recommend managers and leaders use within the workplace. It's a very quantitative method for trying to identify problems in terms of change implementation and the resistance variables. So let's take a look at the formula. It starts first with C equals D times M times P is greater than R. So what does that mean? Well, C is the degree of change achieved. D is the dissatisfaction with the status quo. So there has to be some sort of dissatisfaction with the status quo or no one's going to change. M is the model that's going to be used for the change implementation. And that's what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about the force field analysis model that we recommend you use. The other thing is P. This is the process for the implementation. And then R is the resistance forces to the change. So at the end of the day, D times M times P must be greater than the change resistance forces. If not, change will not take hold and it will not stick long term. We're going to be talking in the next video about D, which is how we can generate dissatisfaction for the status quo, and P, the proper processes for implementing the change as well. But again, let's take a look at the model and look at Dr. Lewin's force field analysis model. So if we look at the force field analysis model, Lewin's force field analysis model is a decision-making and change management tool. It was developed by Kurt Lewin. It helps individuals and organizations understand the dynamics of change by identifying and analyzing the driving and restraining forces that influence the situation. By identifying the forces, the restraining forces and the driving forces, it gives us some sort of strategy in which we can start to augment the driving forces, reduce the resistant forces, and try to get that current state of equilibrium to the targeted equilibrium state for the change. So here's an example. Let me just break it down a little bit. So at the very beginning of change, you have the current state. So that's the status quo. And that's what you're seeing here in the middle. Then you have driving forces right now that are keeping that status quo in place. But you also have resistance forces that are always pushing against your equilibrium, trying to get you to either slack off a little bit, backtrack a little bit. But we all feel these forces every single day within the workplace and in our personal lives. Those restraining forces in this particular theory, they never go away. So even if you mitigate or negate restraining forces, they will come back. So you always have to keep the mitigating forces and the negating forces in place. If not, the restraining forces will win and you'll lose that equilibrium state that you're trying to get to. Okay, so now let's look at the target for change. So at the very beginning, you've got a state of equilibrium, current status quo. You have a target for the change. That's where you want to get. And then you start to identify what is preventing me from getting to the targeted change that I'm looking for. That's when you highlight restraining forces. Start to list those down, itemize those out. Then on the driving forces, what's driving the change for the organization? You start to put and list and itemize those driving forces. When you look at them side by side, you'll be able to clearly see, do I have enough driving forces to get to the targeted change? If not, you need to augment more driving forces. If you have enough, then you'll start to slowly see the status quo evaporate and the targeted change start to manifest. I hope this video helps you understand a little bit more about the force field analysis model and the overall challenges that we have in terms of making change stick within the workplace. Let's try to get that 30% success rate up to at least 60%. And we can do it together because change starts with one, because individuals that change organizations.